All right, how are you guys doing tonight? Awesome, good to see you guys. How many people are here for the first time tonight? Anybody? There's a few. All right, very cool, very cool. You're not. So, thank you for joining us. Glad to have you back at the speaker series here. We are adding some, always adding some stuff through the museum. So as you maybe are here strolling through the museum, you might see some new artifacts and some cases, things like that. That's kind of one of our current missions, is to help get some more of this stuff out of archives and out on display so you can see it. One of the things we're really proud of, last month we took in a donation. We had the reunion of our unit that flew our Huey in Vietnam. And several of the members who actually flew our Huey were here and saw it again for the first time since leaving Vietnam. One of the folks from the unit donated an original nose cover that had the Viking artwork painted on it, and it's original as it left Vietnam. So if you're kind of milling around after the talk tonight, it's out there on display in the case next to the Huey. So really proud. We can't imagine many of those exist. So it was really funny. The guy gave it to us, and he's like, "You might want to. It's really dirty and nicked up. You probably want to sand it down and repaint it and stuff." And we're just like, "No, this is how I left Vietnam, so we're gonna leave it just like it is." So, somebody actually asked me. I went back to get a picture of my computer screen real quick, so I can tell you we got the speaker series lined up for next year. So we have some cool ones. I won't go down the entire list, but just give you an idea of a couple. So next month we have a Blue Angel here. Actually, he was a former commanding officer of the Blue Angel, so Blue Angel number 1. He'll be here to talk with the unit historian about the history of the Blue Angels and then his experience in leading the team. He's the only guy to ever lead the team, go back to the fleet, and then come back to the team. So he led the team twice. So he's really cool. He'll be a really cool guy. After, of course, our Wright Brothers banquet, we were in December. We'll be back to the regular speaker series in January. We have University of Wisconsin is coming up to talk about their MIA project, where they're going overseas and they're finding and excavating crash sites of World War II aircraft and bringing home the remains of some of our fallen flyers and giving them a proper burial. February, let's see, we have Matt Yunkin coming to talk about flying in the air shows and flying that Twin Beach and doing some of the cool routines that he does there. Let's see, after that in March we have John Larison, who was actually one of the first pilots flying the Sky Raider in Vietnam. And he's going to talk about flying some of the early missions in the A-1 Sky Raider. After that, one I'm really excited about, we've been working on for a while. We have, his call sign was Munster, but he was one of the guys flying a Tomcat that shot down a Libyan MiG in 1989. It's the Gulf of Sidra, so he'll be here to talk. He's the first time he's ever actually publicly spoke about shooting down an aircraft during the Gulf of Sidra sort of incident. And then after that, we have a Coast Guard pilot who flew Jayhawks during the recovery of Katrina. He'll be here after that. Let's see. In June, we're calling it the Cessna with Teeth. It's a gentleman who actually is using a Cessna Caravan, flying for the government, doing test flying, firing off live ordnance and missiles off of a Cessna Caravan. So that ought to be pretty cool. He's a test pilot flying out in the desert, so we're going to have him out to talk about what that's like. We do take a little break in July for that small show we have. And then we come back in August. Everybody's tired in August, so you're kind of stuck with me. I'm going to talk about the history of MASH units and a little bit of what went into real MASH units in the TV show, if you're a fan of the TV show. In October, we have Zara Rutherford, who is the youngest woman to ever fly around the world. And she's going to be here to talk about what it was like to fly single-engine airplane around the world. And then Skip Holm is our November. He's going to be talking about the quest for speed, some of the pretty high, powerful aircraft he's flown. So we have some cool stuff coming up. So thank you guys for coming out, supporting the museum and the speaker series. Tonight we have a really, really special guest. It's someone that every day when she goes to work, she's going to work to hopefully not see you guys, but know that if you need her and her crew, she's there. Kai Fitzek is a air ambulance helicopter pilot with UW Medflight. She has a really amazing story. She's a part of an amazing crew. She's been gracious enough to drive about 2 hours each way today to come up and join us to be here tonight. So let's give a warm EAA welcome for Kai.
I'll come over to this one to start. Is that good? Oh, lots louder. All right. Hi, my name is Kai. I currently fly for UW Medflight. We have 3 bases in Portage, Madison, and Mineral Point, so I'll go into that later. But I am the lead pilot in Madison, the Madison base. Tonight I thought I would just share with you how I got started in aviation and the different jobs I've had along the way, and just some about what my job looks like now, just a day-to-day in the life of an air ambulance crew. I'm often asked how I got started in aviation, and I think I was kind of late to the show, honestly. As a kid, I had very little exposure to aviation, so it had not occurred to me to become a pilot till I was well into my 20s. I pursued a couple different options. I was interested in being a veterinarian. I thought I might be an auto mechanic. I wanted to be a sound engineer. There were lots of different directions I went, but nothing stuck. So I was about 21 years old, and I had an associate in liberal arts and very little direction. But I met a girl at a local coffee shop who was graduating from high school, and she had dreamed of being a helicopter pilot her entire life. And I thought, oh, that's a great idea. I think I might try that too. So I gave it a shot. And I found that I really enjoyed, it was just the right amount of excitement and challenge, and I thought that's something I could do for a long time. So I jumped in. With helicopter training, there's a number of ways you can get started to become a commercial pilot. One of the more common routes is to go into the military. Another route that people might go is to go into the military and then use the military benefits to pay for training. And then the third route, which is what I did, was just jump into flight training and take out lots of loans. So I did it the expensive way, is what I say. So in 2007, I went back to school for my second associate's degree to get an Associates of Science in helicopter piloting. So I worked for 2 years at Ames Community College in Greeley, Colorado, and they worked in correspondence with a flight school called Front Range Helicopters, which was based out of the Fort Collins Loveland Airport in Colorado. During that 2-year time period, I completed my private, instrument, commercial, and CFI and II ratings. So that's pretty standard, pretty good time frame to go through that program. This helicopter on the screen here is an example of the type of helicopter I flew. It's a Schweitzer 300. There's 3 different types of training helicopters that are pretty common in the industry. What I flew was the Schweitzer 300, go back here, which is this one on the left side here. This on the right side is an R-22, so the Robinson 22 or Robinson 44 are also very common helicopters for flight training. When I was doing my training in Colorado, it was very high density altitude. So the Schweitzers, I think, had a better performance history at that density altitude. The Robinsons since have become a much more popular training helicopter because the cost of operation is quite a bit cheaper. Not significantly cheaper, but it puts a dent in the training for sure. The interesting history about the Schweitzer 300, which has also been called the Hughes 269 and the Sikorsky 269, depending on who owns it. It was one of the original Army training helicopters. So back when the first pilots were learning to fly helicopters in the Army, they would start in a Schweitzer 300. Since then, they have graduated they went through a Bell 206 as their initial trainer, and now they fly of what I fly today as their initial trainer in the Army. There's a third training helicopter, which I have just like half an hour in, and this is the Gimbal Cabri. It's definitely more modern. It's the newest training helicopter you'll find out there. I think you're probably Going to see the Robinson more than the gimbal still, but the gimbal has more advanced avionics. It also has, you can see a fenestrated tail back there. So that's popular in helicopters for safety. And then the gimbal Cabri that I flew has a glass cockpit as well. So those things make it an easy transition from that aircraft into your bigger turbine aircraft. So you'll see gimbal Cabris at a lot of the new university programs, like I think the Dubuque Flight School or the University of Dubuque has a gimbal Cabri training program. But the cost has gone up quite a bit. It's pretty expensive. I mean, it was pretty expensive when I started. Normal flight hour was about $350 an hour for training. And anymore, I think the gimbal Cabri is probably about $650 to $700 an hour, which is pretty significant. I fly airplanes too, and I'm renting those for about $100 an hour. So it's a pretty significant cost difference. When I went through training, the total amount that I paid was about 70 grand. But recently I've talked to people looking into training where the programs go up to $150,000 to $200,000. I worked with one guy who somehow ended up spending about $300,000 to get into his career, which is just wild. But I mean, worth it if you have a passion for it and it pays off. And thankfully, in my case, it did. It's brought me to where I am. So I'll go through the rest of my experience here. I ended up taking a diversion from aviation for a little while. While I was going through flight training, I was working at a production factory overnight just to pay my bills. And so right when I was finishing up my flight training and starting to work with students at the flight school where I trained, the factory that I was working at shut down. So they ended up laying off all of their employees, which was fine with me because I wanted to be a pilot anyways. But part of the layoff benefit was that I could go back to school, and it was funded by the layoff program. So I just figured if you have an opportunity for free education, you might as well take it. So I went back to the University of Northern Colorado, and I got a bachelor's of physics. And because I wanted that bachelor's to be useful, I decided I would also get a teaching degree so I could apply physics to something. During this time, I didn't completely stop flying. I actually started doing some fixed wing training, and I added on my private pilot rating in a Piper Cherokee that my friend owned. In 2012, I also had my first daughter named Basil, who I forgot to mention earlier. I met my husband at flight school while we were at Front Range Helicopters. And then while I was at the university, I ended up getting a scholarship called a Noyce Scholarship, which was specifically for science teachers to help motivate them to get into the field. So as part of this scholarship, the stipulation was that I needed to teach 1 year in a high-needs school as a science teacher. So following my graduation from University of Colorado, Northern Colorado, I ended up taking a job in Baton Rouge, Louisiana as a high school science teacher. So this was quite a big change in route for me. It was a pretty inner city school. I was teaching physics, environmental science, and physical science for grades 9 through 12. So these are some of my students here doing a lab. I believe this lab we were talking about suspension bridges, so we were talking about like arm, moment, and mass, so it was kind of neat to have that knowledge from aviation carry over into a different realm. When I taught for a year and a half at McKinley High School, and after I finished my second year or full year of teaching, I resigned from teaching, and I also had my second daughter. So then I went back into aviation. So this was kind of a scary place to be because I was a 300-hour pilot who was out of currency by about 4 years, and the most common training helicopter in the industry was the Robinson. So there weren't a lot of jobs that I was qualified for. But I happened to find this job at a really neat FBO in Snohomish, Washington. They needed a helicopter pilot, and they hired me over the phone, and we moved our family across the country and lived in Washington for a while. So I worked in Snohomish, Washington as an instructor for private commercial instrument instructor and CFII students. And between my time at Front Range and at Snohomish Flying Service, I had 16 students that I sent to check rides with a 100% pass rate. Snohomish Flying Service is based at Harvey Field, and it's a really neat FBO. They have fixed wing training, they have helicopter training, and they have a skydive program there, as well as some hot air balloons. There's a restaurant on the field. So if you're ever way out on the West Coast, I highly recommend stopping by. It's a neat spot. I also conducted aerial tours of Seattle, and then some photo flights as well for local real estate agents while I was there. So I just have a few pictures to show you from that time. This was when I was flying a photo flight. Snohomish is really neat. It's located just north of Seattle. It's west of the Cascade Mountains and east of the Puget Sound. So it's just beautiful scenery. Over here, you can see this is the flight school where I was located with one of my students. This is Mount Rainier here on one of my flights. We got this really great picture. And here you can see the Space Needle in Seattle in the background there. This is some of the scenery. This is a student I had who came down from Alaska. He was a commercial pilot up there and wanted to add on his commercial helicopter rating. This up here was a tulip field. So you can see there's a tulip growing season. People would go fly tours of those. And then this over here was a really neat river that ran through a valley around a mountain. And a lot of the water up there in Washington has this glacial runoff, which you can see sometimes here in Wisconsin too while you're flying. But it gives it that really neat teal color. Here's some more student pictures. This guy here was a Seattle air traffic controller. He worked for Seattle Center, but also was trained as a helicopter pilot, so he came and flew with me. This guy here was a Microsoft engineer who worked in Seattle, but was from Germany. So you just get a really wide variety of people that you're working with when you're a flight instructor. Any flight instructors here at all? Yeah, it's a fun job. I really enjoyed it. The challenge of it, I think, is you're flying with so many different personalities. So you're a little bit of a psychologist as well as you're approaching each student to help them succeed. I have one more picture of my time there. So this is the Huskies Stadium up in Seattle, just north of Boeing Field, which is north of SeaTac by a little ways. This was just another lake that we found back in the mountains of in a valley of the Cascades. And then here's looks like a forest fire plume that we were flying nearby. Just beautiful scenery. I really enjoyed my time up there, but once you hit 1,000 hours, that's kind of the magic number for a helicopter pilot to move on to the next job. So I started to get that itch in about 2017, and I got my first turbine job as a tour pilot of the Grand Canyon. So we moved the whole family over to Las Vegas, and I learned to fly the EC-130, which you see here. This was a really steep learning curve. You go from flying a piston helicopter to a turbine helicopter. The blades spin the opposite direction because it's a Eurocopter. We also were operating out of Las Vegas Class Bravo airspace, so that was a big challenge. And then the schedule was challenging too, but it was really great experience still. I got to meet people from all over the world and see some really amazing scenery. This is a view of the canyon. And then here, a view from when I was sitting behind doing a ride along. We would actually do landing tours. So most of our most common tour was we would take off out of Las Vegas, fly to the canyon, fly to the bottom of it, and then we would shut down and have a picnic. So this was Quartermaster Bluff, where we landed and had our picnic together with our passengers. Overall, it was a really good job, very good experience. I got that turbine transition. I learned to fly a much faster and more challenging machine. Some highlights from the canyon, I met people from all over the world, so I had a ton of passengers from Australia, and then we had, just really all over. It was really neat to talk to so many different people coming to see the U.S. One highlight was I flew a wedding in the helicopter. There was a couple from Germany that came in, and they were in the helicopter with their officiant and a photographer, and we flew over the Las Vegas Strip, and by the time we landed, they were married. That was pretty cool, yeah. And then just learning new skills in a new environment was really good. Some of the challenges of flying as a tour pilot, you're flying out of Las Vegas, so you have potential for a lot of sick passengers. A lot of people in Vegas are drinking plenty, so a hangover in a helicopter and the heat, it equals, just bad news. And then sometimes you get the domino sickness, you have one person who's sick and the next person suddenly, so that was challenging, but you work through it, and a lot of people were very resilient. They were very happy with their tours, even if they didn't feel that great through it. The schedule was somewhat challenging as a tour pilot. It's just kind of a beginner job, so they get as much work as they can out of you. And then it was just a seasonal job, so it lasted about 6 months for me. And it was a really good intro to the 135 realm, which paved a good foundation for the rest of my jobs. My next job was in the Gulf of Mexico with a company called Rotorcraft Leasing Company, or RLC. This job was really neat. So I would fly out of Louisiana. It was a 2-week on, 2-week off schedule. And I learned to fly a variety of helicopters, including the Bell 206, so that's what you see right here, which, like I mentioned earlier, was another helicopter that they used for training in the Army. The Bell 407 was the second helicopter I flew with RLC. I'll show you a picture of that on the next slide. The Bell 407 is probably my favorite single-engine helicopter. It's just got really, really great performance, and it handles very nicely. And then a really great thing I got to do in the Gulf was to fly the S-76, which is a multi-engine, dual pilot, IFR certified helicopter. So when you're doing your helicopter training, you do your IFR rating, but no training helicopters actually have the ability to fly IFR, because a helicopter has to have a SAS system, stability augmentation system, and or an autopilot in order to be certified to fly IFR. So when you're training, it honestly just feels like kind of an idea you're training for. It feels like something you'll never actually do. But there's a lot of jobs, like my current one, which require IFR time. So there's kind of that jump to how do I get this experience without having the experience? And I was able to do that in the Gulf, flying the S-76. I really, really enjoyed this job. I think one of the big differences from the Canyon to this job was the autonomy. In the Canyon, you're kind of just a line of tour pilots flying out and then back. You do kind of the same thing every day. It's very prescribed route. When you're in the Gulf, they gave you all the tools you needed to succeed, and then gave you a helicopter and a contract and said, go do it. So there was a lot of just figuring things out as I went, and not a ton of oversight, so you really got to learn a lot about what you were doing. The group of pilots that I worked with there was really great as well. That can really make or break your job experience, just the people that you work with. And then, one thing that was really interesting in the Gulf was doing the mandatory water egress training. So that was both pilots and passengers had to do mandatory egress training, which looked like we would first do survival skills just in a swimming pool to simulate being out at sea without any if we had gone down in the water or whatnot. And the egress training, they had a cockpit simulation that you would sit in and strap yourselves into, and they'd lower you into the water. And first they'd just lower you in, and then you have to take off your seatbelt and swim out the windows. And then it graduates to actually going down into the water and then inverting as well, and getting your seatbelt off and pushing out a door or window and swimming to the top. So even if you're a strong swimmer, it's very challenging. It was just because the panic of being underwater upside down can be very disorienting. And then another thing that was really cool about the Gulf training was I got to do full down auto rotations to the water. So if you are unfamiliar, an auto rotation is when we simulate an engine failure in helicopters. So you're going from the engine driving the blades to the helicopter dropping and the air coming up through the blades, driving the blades. The air coming up through the blades lets you have energy enough so that you can slow down and have a safe landing at the bottom. So we practice those all the way through training and through any training program you would go through. In the Gulf, we had a helicopter with fixed floats on it, so we would actually do full down autos to a lake, and that was a really amazing experience. This next picture, this is a Bell 407 here. It's very similar to the 206, it's just a little bit bigger. It has 4 blades, and then it had an automated start system, a FADEX system, which is nice. And then this was the day here that I upgraded from SIC to the PIC of the S-76. So that was a really cool day. We were always flying dual pilot crews. You'll see 76s out flying EMS jobs, and they're not required to have dual pilot crews. But in the Gulf, any IFR operation requires 2 pilots. So that was really good too. I got to learn to fly in a crew, which is a valuable experience. This was also the A model of the 76, which is really like one of the very first ones that had it has stability augmentation system, but no autopilot. So we were basically hand flying IFR in the Gulf every day, which was a really good foundation for learning IFR, because everything got easier after that, basically. Here's a couple more pictures from the Gulf. Here's flying IFR. From the other seat there, and then just one of my co-pilots there with the 76. Oh, these are neat too. So this is what I would do. I would fly people and passengers out back and forth to the oil rigs. So this one here is a single pylon oil rig. This is one of the biggest ones I would fly to. This one was called Brutus. They all had names and identifiers based on the region of the ocean they were in. Brutus was, I want to say it was about 100 miles offshore. It was probably one of the furthest ones we fly to, which they would consider a deep water oil rig. And then these are just some pictures from when I was shut down on the oil rigs, because sometimes you'd just be downtime on the rigs, hanging out, waiting for the crews to direct you to do the next task. And this is a poor picture, but it's a sea turtle. So that was another neat thing in the Gulf. We see a lot of wildlife. I know I saw lots of manta rays, sea turtles, and sharks. There are lots of sharks around the oil rigs there. So I did this for 2 years, and it was a great job, but it was challenging for the family to have a parent away from home for 2 weeks and then coming home. So my husband, who's actually a pilot as well, he ended up flying for UW Medflight a year before I did, and after we had lived here for a year, they recruited me to come fly with them as well. So that's what I'm doing now. So I work for Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation provides the helicopters, pilots, and mechanics for UW Medflight, and they're contracted with UW. With Metro, I initially flew the EC-135, which was also a great helicopter. We're now currently flying the EC-45, which is E-Light, or the BK-117C2E. And the difference between the E-Light and your standard 145 is it's a different avionics package, which reduced the weight of the helicopter by about 200 pounds, I believe. So we have a little bit more room for fuel or passenger, and a different navigation system. These helicopters are multi-engine, just like the 76, but we fly single pilot IFR because we have a fully functioning autopilot in addition to the SAS system. So we don't have a 4-axis autopilot, but we have a 3-axis autopilot. So when that autopilot is engaged fully, the only thing that we're really controlling is our power change. Metro is based in Shreveport, Louisiana, and they, like I said, provide the helicopters and mechanics. And our training with Metro is conducted in a full motion flight simulator down in Louisiana. Here's some pictures from the flight simulator. So you can see it's pretty good graphics. I mean, it's not completely realistic, but it does have that motion, which makes it nice for getting the feedback from the helicopter while you're training. The FFS, or the full flight simulator, can be used for IFR, VFR, day and night, and NVG training as well. So we do fly with NVGs at night. When we fly at UW, we fly with white phosphorus night vision goggles, which is really a game changer. I can't imagine people flying into some of the things we fly into without them, you know, because at night we'll sometimes be called out to scenes, and you're meeting a ground crew who's told you the area is clear, but if you can't see it, you'd really just have a searchlight. So I'm very grateful for NVGs and the training that we do with them. So here's just an overview of med flight. This here was the EC-135, which is the helicopter that I started in. They transitioned into the E-Light because we have a much better fuel load and passenger load in the E-Light. So we have 3 bases located in Madison, Portage, and Mineral Point. As a whole, we have 3 helicopters and 2 ambulances every shift available. We also have a 4th helicopter that is our spare helicopter, but we share it with another metro program. So depending on who has scheduled maintenance, they get first priority for that helicopter. The entire program is staffed with 12 pilots if we're fully staffed. I think right now we are. We just hired our 12th pilot, which is really nice. We have 7 mechanics, so 2 at each base, and then we have a lead mechanic as well. We have 16 or more EM flight nurses, so emergency medicine flight nurses. They split those up between our bases. So our bases have like 5 or so nurses who are stationed at each base. So people you would fly with regularly. And then we have around 20 doctors. So UW is unique in the air ambulance world in that they are one of the only US programs that fly with a doctor staffed as well as a nurse. I think the more common crew configuration is for a nurse and paramedic team to be on board. So the doctors all fly different bases. The doctors do 24-hour shifts. The nurses and pilots all do 12-hour shifts. We also have 2 PEDS NEO teams per day, so that consists of a nurse and an RT. And I believe on those teams we have 8 members of each, so 8 nurses and 8 RTs total. And then I'd say we have about 10 dispatchers. There's usually 1 or 2 on shift, and the dispatchers will coordinate transport for our teams. This is a map of Wisconsin, obviously. I'm going to show you our service area here. So our main base right now is in Madison. Madison will often service the south region, and they fly all the way down into Illinois as well, and sometimes a little bit of Iowa. They will commonly go down to Rockford. They often go to Janesville, Watertown. There's Stoughton, Fort Atkinson. So that's kind of their region right there. They also have all the PEDS NEO teams with them. So any flight that's going to go get a baby or a child and bring them back to UW or take them anywhere else would be initiated out of Madison right now. The base that I worked at for the past 3 years was Portage here. And Portage was actually the newest base in the program. We will often go to Beaver Dam, that's very typical. We would go to Baraboo, which is just over here, south of the Dells. We'd go, I've gone to Toma, Black River Falls, Wisconsin Rapids, Stevens Point, pretty much this whole region here. So we kind of have the biggest area up on the top for the Portage base. The furthest I've ever flown out of Portage was up to Houghton, Michigan. So way up to Lake Superior up there. Yeah, that was about 2 hours each way. And then our third base is over, let's see, so Richland Center, it's near Dodgeville. So they service the west area here. So they're Dodgeville, Richland Center, Prairie du Chien, a lot of the western area there. There are definitely other programs that you guys are probably familiar with. The ones I know of, there's Flight for Life, which is based out of Waukesha. Here near Oshkosh and Appleton, you have Theta Star. They have a base at Neenah over there. And then over here we have a Gunderson lacrosse program. That's also a Metro program. And then far to the north, I know there is an Aspirus program, which I believe is based out of Wausau. And then LifeLink 3 is another air ambulance program that operates in Minnesota and the northern part of Wisconsin here. So we have some overlap. Generally, it's dependent on who's closest to the patient, on who gets dispatched to go get them. Here's some cool pictures from Portage. I work with a nurse who's also an amateur photographer, so I get a lot of really great sunset pictures here. This picture up here is actually at the Portage base. We have one parked and we have one helicopter coming in, and you can see a little bit of white out there, which is a big consideration in the winter time flying in a helicopter. Generally, if you're experiencing white out, what you would do is you'd come down and hold kind of a high hover, and typically the powdery snow will blow away, and in about maybe 20 seconds you're good to land. Here's another nice picture of the helicopter at Portage. So you can see this is the EC-145 that has the not fenestrated tail. It is very tall, so it's still quite safe. We do have some very tall nurses who would need to watch their head. As a general rule of safety, our teams just stay in front of the horizontal stabilizer, and that's kind of our general rule. If the helicopter is running, you just don't walk near the tail. Here's just an overview of how our transports work. The transports for UW are divided into two basic categories. We have interfacility transports and scene flights. So an interfacility transport would be somebody who's already at a hospital, either in an emergency department or an ICU, and they need to be taken to a hospital that has a higher level of care. So most of those patients will look like heart attack and stroke patients with additional other types of illnesses. Oftentimes we're taking them to UW because the patient has requested UW, or it depends on the type of care that the hospital has. Like UW has a very good cath lab for heart attacks. I know they have a stroke center, but we do take them to other hospitals as well. Some common ones will go to our freighter in Milwaukee, Marshfield, I went to the other day, and then the Gunderson Lacrosse Hospital as well. And then a scene flight is more kind of what you picture a med flight helicopter doing. It's where there may be an accident on the road. It could also be a heart attack or something like that, where an ambulance service has been called to the scene, and that ambulance service has requested that a helicopter be dispatched as well. So scenes are neat because we are coordinating with lots of people. There's the EMS service that first responds. There's the fire service that comes to the scene to set up the LZ for the helicopter. And then there's our team that comes in. So it's a very collaborative effort. And those are often not designated landing zones. So that fire crew is really evaluating where they want us to land, making sure we don't have any obstacles that are going to be a hazard to us, that it's going to be a safe surface for us as well. The way that it works when I get, here's some other flight type things we do. So we do some community events as well, in addition to our interfacility transports and scene transports. We do safety days within communities, so if they have an open house at a fire station, we'll fly in. We do LZ training with local fire departments. Like I said, we really rely on those fire departments to set up the scenes for us. So we like to meet with them and tell them specifically what we're looking for and answer any questions they have for us about how to help us from the ground to have a safe landing zone. We also do helipad tours for students and aviation organizations. So this picture here was up at my Portage base, and this was a Girls in Aviation Day that my friend Susan Schwab here brought out. Susan is a retired United pilot, and she donates a lot of her time to girls in aviation to motivate them to pursue it in the future. So that was really fun to give them a helipad tour and show them the helicopter. Because UW is a teaching program, we also often have ride-alongs. So we'll have residents or fellows who are doctors in training, basically riding along with our programs. Uh, Here's just an overview of the day at the base. So this is my crew that I was working with that day, washing the helicopter. So we try to pitch in, keep it clean. Maintenance does a great job of that as well. So like I mentioned before, the pilots and the nurses both do 12-hour shifts. It's an FAA regulation for pilots that we can't work past 14 hours, and we need to have a 10-hour rest period between our next shift. And the pilots do a 7-on, 7-off schedule, and then our doctors work 24-hour shifts. The day starts with a pre-flight and daily checks of medical equipment. So I take care of the helicopter. Maintenance is usually doing a daily as well. And then the medical crew is going to evaluate all their equipment on board and make sure it looks good. And then we meet as a team to discuss conditions for the day and review our standard operating procedures. So during that time, we'll talk about weather, we'll talk about the weight of the crew. We'll just kind of meet and see how everybody's doing for the day. We'll talk about IFR considerations and review our bottom lines, like no-go decisions that we might have to make, or we also review our emergency procedures as well. And then a couple hours into our shift, we usually have a program-wide meeting, so everybody calls in so we can discuss as a program any airspace considerations or LZ updates, any helipad construction, anything that's going on. And then we just wait. We're just at the base waiting for a call. So some days, if the weather's bad, that means we're just on the ground for 12 hours. But I would say on average, we fly probably 1 flight per shift per base. So usually, and that looks like a lot more flying in the summer than winter because we don't have any anti-icing equipment in the helicopter. When we get a call, dispatch will tone us out. We have basically a handheld radio that they tone out our flight on. So when they give us the call, they tell us what type of flight it is, where we're going to pick them up, what the destination is, and the weight of the patient. At the same time, I use an electronic flight bag, so everything I need to accept my flight is on my iPad. So they send me a flight request on my iPad. If you guys are familiar with ForeFlight, that flight request can easily overlay onto ForeFlight, so it allows me to make a quick evaluation of weather and distance and fuel considerations for the flight. Patient specifics are not shared during the initial tone out because they wanted to reduce the mission mentality of air ambulance and make sure we don't feel pressure to fly based on knowledge of the patient. So we just get the bare minimum, how much do they weigh, where are we getting them, and where are we going. So that's while the pilot runs a risk assessment. After I finish that, I send it to my operational control center, which is a metro organization in Shreveport. We have the mantra on our teams that it's 4 to go and 1 to say no. So OCC, the Operational Control Center, is one of those crew members who's able to speak up and say, no, you may not take this flight. I see a problem. And that goes for anybody on the team. If anybody doesn't feel confident that it's safe or that it can be accomplished, then we don't go. We are typically, from the time dispatch receives the call to the time we're lifting, is approximately 10 to 15 minutes. I know sometimes we've gotten down to about 6 minutes to get off the ground. If we're having to do IFR planning, there will definitely be more time invested for planning. Probably my favorite part of the job is just the people that I work with. The nurses and doctors and dispatchers, everybody involved, they're just the most intelligent and highly motivated people that I've ever worked with. It's just really neat teams. And then in addition to that, we work with the ground crews and the EMS crews, so it's just such a collaborative effort. It's such a neat thing to be part of a team that's so impactful on the community, really. And on that team, I expect everybody to be an active team member. So my nurses will be sitting in the front with me, and they'll help me with inputting stuff into my my GPS. They'll help with ground communication. And then everybody on board is active, looking outside, talking about anything they see. And then after each flight, we always meet as a team and give feedback so that we can improve. So the teamwork in this program has made it probably one of the best jobs I've ever had. You just have this whole crew of such competent people that are carrying such a big responsibility. So when I started, UW Medflight has been in business since 1985, but I was the very first female pilot that they had ever hired. So it was about my 4th day on the job. I got to make history for them and fly in the first all-female crew. So this is my female crew from that day. And it was very special to be a part of. The doctors we fly with, well, so there's 12 pilots, and I'm the first female they've ever had. So you can see in the helicopter industry, I think females are about 2% of pilots still, which is, I mean, I have no explanation for it. I think it's potentially just a lack of exposure. Like, I didn't have any idea I could become a pilot till I was quite a bit older. So it was neat to get the publicity to maybe be able to encourage other females to pursue the career. The doctors we work with as well, I think I've worked with 40 doctors or so with MedFlight so far, and of those 40, I think 4 of them are female. So it's another industry where you're just not seeing a lot of female out there doing it. So this was a really special day. It was fun to be part of this team. It got a lot of good publicity, and hopefully it can inspire other people. But anyways, that's kind of been my journey with aviation. I've learned a lot along the way. It's been a really good experience. And yeah, that's where I've ended up.
Kai, thank you so much. Kai is kind enough to answer some questions. If anybody has some questions, I'll kind of come around, just raise your hand and we can see. But to start us off, I just wonder, can you tell us, is there a certain challenging LZ you ever flew into on a scene that sticks out among maybe some of the others?
I did one recently, actually. I think one of the biggest challenges when we're flying is wires, because so the surfaces we land on, like ideally we land on a hard surface, like a road. But when you have a road, you most of the time have wires going along the road. So like one the other day, it was a road with wires on the north side and trees on the south side, and then a highway on the east side. So it was adequate, but it's challenging, I think, sometimes for the crews to see how much space we need versus how much they think it is. So that one was a little bit tight. And I think that's where like the crew members speaking up is very I always brief my crews, if you see wires, say something. If you see something at the last minute, just say go around. I'll go around without question and we'll fix the problem. Because we can always move to another LZ as well.
Awesome, thank you for that. Anybody have a question? Dave, you just want to yell it out since you're so close.
How long is your checklist?
Oh, our checklist, let's see. Well, physically it's looks like this. So we have a pre-start check, we have a starting check, and then post-start check. We run through it in about 2 minutes, 2 to 5 minutes. Yeah.
Joe, you're a helicopter guy. I'm going to put you on the spot. You got a question for her?
Sure. Tell me about the difference between the aircraft with the tail rotor and the aircraft with the fenestron. Can you tell any difference in flying the aircraft at all?
I definitely prefer the non-fenestrated tail rotor. The fenestron I think it's both quieter and safer is kind of the motivation for it. I feel the ones without the fenestron are more responsive, so you get a better input from your pedals.
Oh, we got a question right here. Hold on 1 second.
It's more a question of insurance and billing the patient.
Oh, sure.
Do you log the distance of fuel that passes on to the person who you're transporting?
Well, I don't know much about the billing side of it, but I do log the distance of every flight. And we're going more in flight time for what I'm logging. I would assume the dispatch center probably keeps track of the distance as well. And my knowledge of the billing practice is pretty limited, but I think UW has a lot of pride in not pursuing balance billing, it's called, where they will bill insurance, and then beyond insurance, they don't pursue it from the patient. So I don't know the details of it, and I haven't talked to somebody to confirm that, but I like to believe that the burden of the finances do not fall on the family too heavily.
Can you talk about what it's like to fly on NVGs, night vision goggles?
Yeah, they're great. I mean, it's really, on a full moon night or even half moon night, it's just as good as daytime, really. You're getting, ours, it's white phosphorus, so it's all black and white or grayscale. But you can see, I mean, all the details you would need for landing. The challenges are we fly with helmets all the time for safety. And when you're putting NVGs, you have a battery pack on the back of the helmet, and then you also have the NVGs on the front. So you're adding, maybe 2 pounds, but that can definitely contribute to some neck strain. It can be kind of fatiguing.
When you talk with dispatch, what kind of things are you talking over when you're considering taking a flight?
Well, dispatch, they're just going to tell me about the flight. We usually don't have too much conversation. They leave it to me to make a final decision. If I'm making that consideration, though, what I'm looking at is, there's all kinds of risk factors, but we look at both a dynamic and a static risk score. So a static risk score would be something like, how many days have I worked in a row? Or how much sleep did I get last night? What's the experience of my medical crew? The dynamic risk factors are things like weather, like you'd say, what's your ceiling? Is it IFR? Would you need an IFR alternate? Do you have enough fuel? Do you have enough weight? Do you have anybody riding along? So all of those things come into play. There have been a couple times where I felt comfortable with the flight, but just by an honest risk assessment, I was put to a level where I had to turn it down.
When you have flight nurses up front, do they get any stick time?
No, we only have one set of controls installed, much to their dismay. Yep. Yeah. We don't hot refuel. We would in the Gulf, especially with the dual pilot crews, or we had ground crews who did that, but we don't hot refuel with our program. We will hot load patients though. We find that can shave off, about 5 minutes of ground time. So if you're doing something like running into a hospital and grabbing a heart attack patient, that can really make a difference for their outcome. Yeah. I couldn't fly to a scene response because they wouldn't have an approach. But what I could do if I got a call like that is I could look for a local airport and have the crew meet me at that airport, which is always a really good option actually, because that's probably the safest LZ we could land at.
Well, thank you
Yeah, you're welcome.
for being here. Really appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Thanks
So-
for having me.
We got a little gift for you
Okay.
here.
Oh, okay.
So Dave Jackson makes these chocks. We've only given them to 2 people that'll never use them because you have skids.
Sure.
You and the Goodyear blimp are the only people I
Oh,
think we've
that's
ever given
funny.
to